My name is Scott Challoner, and you are listening to the Leaders Council podcast for the people who run the country and the people who keep the country running. Now, as regular listeners of our show will know very well, part of our mission here at the Leaders Council is to bring you a variety of distinct perspectives on leadership and current affairs. And to this end, I'm delighted to be joined on today's show by Kevin M Thomson and Chris Masters, co-founders of the WoW business, Sally Thompson, barrister and chief engagement officer at the WoW, and of course, Flexicare UK founder Jeanette Phillips. Welcome all of you, and thank you ever so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
It's my pleasure, and it's sad, isn't it, that we're actually recording this podcast in December of 2022 at a time where the severity of the cost of living crisis is making households in the UK really feel the pinch, and there are widespread public sector strikes amid rows over pay rises and working conditions. And among these, we're seeing NHS nurses across the UK preparing to strike in September, and that also goes for paramedics. And this is an entirely unprecedented situation, isn't it? So I should mention to those tuning into today's show that today's podcast guests actually co-authored a report titled Strike for Pay, which suggests that the pay dispute within the NHS and social care actually goes far beyond salaries alone. And we will be getting into the reasoning behind the strikes in a little bit more detail as part of this discussion. But first and foremost, I think it's important to talk about where we're at, and it might make sense here to start with yourself, Jeanette. The NHS is facing an unprecedented situation, isn't it? We're seeing record waiting lists and ambulance response times, highest on record, and there are also record waits, aren't there, to be seen by A&E departments. And when we look at why this is happening, the word bed blocking often comes up, and this is because there are patients in hospital that are medically fit to be discharged, but who can't actually leave. And why do we think this is happening? Because this ties in very closely with the social care sector, doesn't it?
Yes, Scott. I think it's a cumulative thing. I don't think it's only over the last 2 decades. I think the sort of failure to prepare for it 2 decades ago. Anyway, we are where we are. However, there are great innovative things coming out now. We learned this week about a trust up north, Sir Jim, moving clients from hospital to nursing homes, which is fantastic. But I think the coordinated response to this needs to have home care at the sort of end of the line, really. So my suggestion when we did this HSJ podcast was maybe we could link up with this type of innovative thinking, because it's just creating a sort of a thoroughfare where people can feel safe, they can move on. We are at capacity at Flexicare, and we're bringing people in from all directions from around the country, putting them up in hotels. So we're thinking completely different to keep one Gloucestershire operating. So because we can only control the controllables, Scott, and one of my colleagues said we can't boil the ocean, we're concentrating on one Gloucestershire to make sure that we get it right in terms of health and well-being, helping the hospitals to move on, because if we can get one model right that works, then we can upscale it. And that's what the discussions we've had this morning with our Flexicare UK team about building more hubs and hublets in Gloucestershire and physically uploading them at the same time as building health and well-being. So but it doesn't help us where we are now in this very second. I'm trying as hard as I can, because I've tried for 25 years to try and get a bit more innovation into the system, but it's difficult because we are now at capacity, and we've utilised every bit of innovative thinking that I can possibly think of has been utilised, but we've still ended up at physical capacity with our 175 people, including management, all working. So this saturation point gets reached very quickly, and that's what's happened, I think, with the hospitals and the nursing homes. And it's where do we go from here? So I know I should be coming up with solutions, but at the moment I'm sat here literally scratching my head thinking we've got every bit of resource out working in Gloucestershire, and it's just trying to get our local area right. And I'm sure this would help the rest of the country, but there's pockets of really great things happening. And I was really warm to hear about the trust up north with the nursing home, because that's fantastic. So we're trying to build in health and well-being, at the same time as get everything going. And we've got a minibus, Scott. We get the minibus out, for instance, is a solution. You know, with the ambulances on strike, I mean, I drive the minibus, and we can go around. We could bring people into hospital if they needed to go. It's working completely off piste now because it's really, really unprecedented times. And I think unprecedented times needs unprecedented action. We've got two big vehicles sat outside, a big motorhome and a big minibus. And if necessary, we will utilise them this winter. We will do whatever it takes, but it can only work in our small area, which is our laboratory. I know I'm not being very helpful, but does that make any sense?
It does, absolutely, and I think it's we're seeing indications of this even when patients are looking to try and actually get to hospital themselves as well, aren't we? I mean, it's like a lot patients are finding new ways rather than waiting for ambulances to get to hospital as well, and this is where we're at. I mean, with these record response times, I mean, there's having to be innovative solutions, and that's having to sort of rub off into the social care sector as well, and I think it's important to also note here that we're not just seeing strikes in the NHS, are we? It's something that is happening all across the public sector. There have been well-documented issues with sort of postal strikes, rail strikes, and interestingly as well, there was a dispute involving the barristers as well going on strike earlier in the year over legal aid. And while there's a settlement that's been reached there, and I'm looking at sort of yourself here, Sally, to talk about this side of things, obviously, there are good reasons why the barristers went on strike, but given that dispute is now being resolved, do you think that the 15% increase in legal aid fees that was negotiated has maybe sort of set a precedent, perhaps, and now there's expectations across the public sector that, oh, well, this is also what we should be getting?
Well, I think it's important to look at the historical context because there hasn't been a rise in legal aid rates for a considerable number of years. And what has happened is that criminal legal aid firms have been going to the wall because it's the rates are such that it's extremely difficult to have a viable criminal practice. And if I can tell you that the average age of duty solicitors, and duty solicitors are the ones who, if you find yourself unfortunately arrested and at the police station and you want some free legal advice, it's the duty solicitor who comes out at no cost to you, funded by the government, to assist you through the police station process. And also duty solicitors are on duty at court if you go for a first court appearance and you don't have your own solicitor. And this captures people who are new, if you like, to the criminal justice system. I think that one of the issues, certainly with the criminal justice system, is that it's a very neglected area because the criminal community don't really excite a lot of public sympathy. But nonetheless, it's an important area of public work, and the average age of duty solicitors has risen from 47 to 49. So in the way that we're seeing a lot of general practitioners retiring because the pressures on practicing are so great, and we haven't got the fresh blood coming through, and exactly the same thing is happening in the legal area. So there aren't young lawyers coming through either to qualify as criminal solicitors or to qualify as criminal barristers. So we have, I think, a recruitment crisis in two areas of the public sector. And this really is the result of many, many decades of underinvestment in the public sector. And if we look to our neighbours on the continent, their tax levels are higher than ours, mostly through greater national insurance contributions, and so they can fund better social and public services. So I think we really have to think about what sort of a society we want. Are we going to have a society that looks after the weak and the vulnerable and looks after its public servants? Because we are servants, we are there to serve the public. if we want that, then it has to be paid for. And the answer, as we know from the recent disastrous budget from this trust, the answer is not to go into some sort of free fall. All of this has to be costed and paid for. And so we need to have a serious discussion about public funding.
Absolutely, and you talked about, of course, that word neglected, and I think a lot of the public sector, certainly nurses within the NHS, do feel neglected, given essentially how sort of their pay has been sort of stagnating over the course of the last few years. And I think when we talk about the fact that the sector is underfunded and there are therefore workforce issues, I think the fact that there are limited resources that are being immensely stretched by the pressure and the demand that they're facing, that's feeding into the whole sort of well-being side of things, isn't it? And that's very much what Strike for Pay focuses on. And if we look at that report and what's contained within it, there's reference to financial well-being and financial health, both of which feed into the wider issues behind the fact that industrial action is going to be taking place. Coming over to yourself now, then, Chris, and I want to talk about sort of financial health and financial well-being. And just for those individuals that haven't read the Strike for Pay report, what's the distinction between the two things first and foremost?
Hi, Scott. Financial well-being has become a buzzword in our industry. I'm a financial planning practitioner. And our industry is focusing very much on whether people's income exceeds their outgoings and whether they have a kind of emergency funds to cope with financial shocks. But I would view this very much as a measure of financial health rather than financial well-being. I guess if you're thinking well-being should really be centred around the quality of our relationships, and that's relationships we have with ourselves and with those around us, then financial well-being is much more how we feel about those relationships, how we feel about how money is impacting our relationships. And also, if we're under a period where we are deeply stressful, for whatever reason we're under stress, then we know from psychology that decision-making really suffers under stress. And so the parts of the brain which deal with logic and language and the bits where we can make sensible decisions are really impacted by overall well-being. So when our well-being is poor, our decision-making suffers. And when our decision-making suffers, then that has a knock-on effect to our financial health. So the difference really between the two is that I think people will look at the output of how are the finances looking from an income expenditure and how much money is in the bank perspective and say something's broken. But probably before we got to that position, someone's personal well-being was probably broken, and that led to poor outcomes. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it certainly does. So essentially what we're talking about here is that financial well-being, it feeds into sort of the personal and workplace well-being as well. And do you think perhaps that there is, when we talk about sort of the importance of relationships here, do we think that a large part of the reason behind this sort of unwell-being that we're seeing developing within the NHS workforce is the fact that there's a reluctance to speak out, and that maybe stems from the fact that people almost feel like they can't talk about such personal things?
I would say massively so. I think there's lots of people suffer with poor financial health that has built up over many years. It kind of comes to a head at some point. But we know that there's a lot of shame associated with poor finances, so people don't like saying anything about it. It's a symptom at the end of a lot of what's gone before it. And people don't like to admit when their money, or we don't talk about money, and we definitely don't like to talk about it when our money is not as good as we think it should be. And I think as well, what I've noticed for many years being a financial advisor is most people expect that everyone else's finances are in good order and that everyone else is really good at this stuff and that they're the anomaly. Where in fact, we know that most people find dealing with the day-to-day finances pretty stressful. I think what we're seeing now is actually there's a group acceptance that there's a cost of living crisis for everybody. We're all kind of acknowledging that we have this issue and maybe we've had it for years. I think it's all coming out now and bubbling over. And then the headline that we're having a cost of living crisis just compound the stress that everyone's feeling.
That's it, isn't it? It's the fact that low pay combined with the cost of living crisis, that essentially sort of, as you say, just compounds that stress that people are already facing, certainly in the NHS, because the workforce is being stretched by the fact that there's a recruitment crisis there. They're therefore overburdened. They're probably still burnt out from the pandemic, and the subsequent effects on mental health all feed into this state of unwell-being that we're seeing within the health and social care workforce. So we've established, haven't we, that it isn't just a case here of NHS nurses just wanting more money. There's a hell of a lot more to consider here. And coming over to yourself now, Kevin, I think it's important that we talk about sort of workplace wellbeing and the need for sort of real communication there. We've got this crisis, but who is to take responsibility for it? Because surely NHS leadership should be promoting a culture where staff feel like they can openly talk about their well-being. And part of the problem is they feel like they can't speak out.
Before I do that, Scott, let me just pick up on what my three teammates here have talked about. Chris said is talking about what's gone before. So if we start with what Jeanette was talking about, the issue, what's gone on before is all the investment has been in care. And I think we mentioned it on our last podcast, when we analysed the CQC strategy document, there were over 100 mentions of the word care and 2 of well-being. And so what we have is a strategy where we're looking at the end of the problem rather than the beginning of the problem. So we talk about prevention plus cure, and we talk about well-being and care. So the focus, if you get it right at the beginning with the prevention, is we wouldn't be in a state now from all 3 levels of personal, financial, and also workplace well-being. And then Sally talks about what we've had is an investment. It's not seen as an investment in the criminal barrister. It's seen as a cost. And so do we have decided that our services are important for us? And as barristers get older and the young kids don't come in, we've got a failing system. The easy thing that people can complain about is pay. So all of these issues that going on strike and standing up with your banners, and it's very easy to talk about pay because it's a single simple message you seem to get across. I think the sad thing about mentioning about pay is it's actually not about pay. It is much more than that about pay, and I obviously talk about the survey that we've just done. And then if you talk about Chris talking about what's gone before. We have a culture where we think that we're talking about financial well-being, but we're talking about financial health. But actually, I remember Chris telling me the story about him visiting a couple, and inevitably, or many couples, and inevitably, there's only one that he talks to, and that's come out in the survey. Things like, I daren't talk to my other half about money or finances, and it comes out again and again. So the issue here is we haven't got what's gone before is there's not only a financial health training, there isn't financial well-being training that says people need to be understand that the relationships when you move into a marriage or a partnership or whatever, or for your kids, is recognizing that your relationship with money is financial health, your relationship with other people, mostly yourself, is about financial well-being. So I think that what's gone before is the critical issue. So specifically, we're trying to, around the NHS and the whole well-being industry, we're trying to now say what we need is well-being plus care and prevention plus cure, putting the 2 together. So that's the sort of strategic focus of where we are. And happily to talk to you that, fortunately, behind all that, we now have the evidence to prove that it really isn't about pay. It's about much more.
Yeah, and looking at some of the evidence that the report actually uncovered and the surveys that went into the report found as well, you essentially look into that sort of trio of things, don't you? The workplace, the personal and the financial well-being within the NHS and social care. And from that came net promoter scores to see exactly where the workforce was with regards to each. So what was found in those numbers exactly?
Well, I think there's two. The great thing is we first did this as we're trying to build up our whole approach to this in 2015 with YouGov. Chris and I were in London and we're having a coffee, and I said, we really need some figures behind this. And having dealt with YouGov before in a previous life, we realised they were around the corner, and so off we went. And so we've got a 2015 survey. We then updated this in 2020, so to start tracking and trending, especially during the pandemic. And then we talked about we now need post-pandemic to find out what's going on now. And talking to Jeanette about this, I said, wouldn't it be great if we could actually do this in the NHS and care? So I spoke to the guys at YouGov, and they have a thing called HCP, which is the healthcare professionals, a separate panel that they keep for this. And so Jeanette's own research business, which is funded by some government funding, she said she would sponsor that. So what we have is a direct comparison between the UK workplace, the omnibus, and the healthcare professionals, which the NHS and the care sector. What's really interesting is that there are some striking similarities, but there are also, if you think about it, it is a public sector, there are striking differences. But the one thing I would say is you can do a separate survey of NHS, you can do a separate survey of Omnibus UK, but then your NHS and care worker will go home and their other half will be doing something completely different in the private sector. And the conversations will therefore be around both of those. So we've got the both of those to compare and contrast.
Yeah, fantastic. So we got the two sides of things there, and what are some of the similarities and the differences that are unearthed with regards to the three sort of areas of well-being?
Well, you talk about the NPS scores. Some people may not know what an NPS is. It's been around for a long, long time, but Bain invented the idea that said if you go in and get your customer service and you get a great smile, Vodafone will be doing NPS on you all the time. So if you give them a 9 and a 10, what Bain said was that's really fabulous, and these guys are promoters. If you give them a 6 and a 7, they're sort of sitting on the fence and they're not really promoting or detracting from you. But anything up to a 6, people are likely to moan. So what they did was they said, okay, let's get the percentages of those. So if everybody scored a 9 out of 10, then you would have 100% plus of a net promoter score, the NPS. If everybody scored a 0 to a 6, you'd have 100% detractors, so you'd have a minus 100%. So what they did was said, okay, well, let's take the detractors away from the promoters, and that'll end up with the net score, the net NPS. So that was great. We've got that. But then as I started to look at these surveys, so much it popped out again and again and again. There seemed to be similarities of what people were saying. And so we were able to say, okay, what I'll do is I'll take all of the detractors, I'll take all the negative comments and find out what it is that people are doing. And I came up with what I'm calling the non-promoter score, the no PS. And so what we now have is not just the NPSs, we have subdivisions that say these are the critical areas. So not only do we know whether it's financial, personal, or organizational well-being, we also know the subsets of those. So your question was around where are the similarities. So when it came to workplace well-being, what's really fascinating is, as you'd probably expect in the care sector, the NPSs aren't as bad. They're not great, but they're not as bad in organizational well-being. So that's minus 39%. Whereas in the UK workplace, despite the pandemic, despite organizations and employers saying we need to focus on well-being, in terms of how often do you attend a well-being meeting, a 9 out of 10, and how often do you actually run one as a manager or a supervisor, 10 out of 10, we have a minus 54% score. But that's not as bad as in terms of your personal NPS scores, which are running in the UK workplace at 73%, or in terms of the NHS at 68%. So there's great similarities between the workplace, and also the financial one is a minus 73 and a minus 76. So that there are similarities in there, but fortunately there is more well-being going on in the care sector.
That's good. So at least obviously there's the positive side of things on the well-being side, but it just goes to show, doesn't it, that some of the issues that we're seeing within the NHS and social care, they're permeating into the private sector and other industries as well. So all of these issues need addressing, you know, personal well-being, workplace well-being and financial well-being. But is there one problem that essentially feeds into the others? I mean, is there a way that we can sort of go about a real solution to this, address one problem and hopefully the others get sorted with it?
I think the single simple answer for all three areas is we desperately need to concentrate on well-being, financial well-being, personal well-being, and workplace well-being, and move to this, as Chris says, what's gone on before. In 10 years' time, I hope that we can look back and say what's gone on from now is we recognise that well-being the UK, of which Chris will tell you, he spotted a Deloitte survey that said you spend £1 on well-being and you get £5.30 back in terms of all of this. So I think the single simple answer is we need to be concentrating on well-beings as well as well-being.
And
Scott,
yes.
Sorry, Scott. May I interject with a bit of historic research? In 2014, Bath University, Dr. Germaine Ravelier, and when health and wellbeing was starting out, we took part in some research for health and wellbeing, and we came out on top at Flexicare. And what the results of the research is that if people feel they have control over their life and autonomy over their employment and how they work, they were much more productive, better immune systems, and much more healthier. And this research was 6, 7, 8 years ago. We came out top because the way that we run Flexicare is very much flexible, because I think that's one of the things that is the constraints within the NHS is the lack of flexibility. I left when I was 25 the NHS for that reason, because we couldn't have the flexibility. And if you give people control over their life and autonomy, as well as an act for health and well-being, as well as then ways that they can earn money in different ways. I think it's doing things differently is the way forward. Because by doing that, you underpin health and well-being and getting the CQC on side and getting them to understand it. I'm being contacted by the lead researcher. Apparently, I'm on the research panel at the CQC, so I'm not a big surprise, but I don't know how that happened. But basically, we will help them all we can to try and steer the future within the parameters of what we can do, Scott. So sorry about that interjection.
No, and I suppose a massive congratulations is in order as well for essentially being on that research panel as well, and hopefully we can see some real positive influence moving forward. And I just want to take the discussion over to the 5 ways to wellbeing, something that's been enduring for quite a long time, because something that is underpinned within that is the importance of connections, relationships, and that's something that we talked about an awful lot today. So when we're talking about solutions here, relationships needs to be very much at the forefront of it, does it not?
Yes, got the hope. Sally coming in there. Yes, connecting is, we call it the number one way to well-being. And I think that the quality of your connections is very key to the level of well-being that you feel. It's noticeable, looking at the research that we've commissioned, that one significant difference that I see between the general UK workplace and the NHS is that there's a much greater unwillingness to talk to others about your personal issues. Just looking at the figures uncovered there, I think that came up as a number 2 issue, 23% of NHS and care workers not feeling able to talk about personal issues, compared with 5% of the general workplace population. And maybe there's a stigma attached to having personal issues when you're working in the healthcare sector, because you're there to help people feel better. So it's very hard to say, well, actually, I don't feel very good myself. And certainly there were a lot of comments around people with mental health issues who were worried about disclosing them because they felt that their managers would, demote them, or there would be bad repercussions for them. So we have the irony of a system that's supposed to be promoting health, actually not supporting their own workers when they have mental health issues.
Mm.
So, Scott, what we want to do is to just help everyone grasp the nettle, really, of well-being, because the 5 ways are very well established. They're grounded in research by the New Economic Foundation. They've been out there a long time. The trouble is everyone recognises they're a good thing, but no one's really doing it. And I suppose it's a bit like, you join a gym in January and it's very hard to get on the machines, isn't it? Because everyone's joined the gym. But by the middle of February, suddenly there are half the number of people at the gym. So we all know what's good for us. It's a way of actually applying it to our daily lives. So our mission really is to change this the 5 ways from being a poster campaign to being a programme that, we will work with organisations to, I hope, inspire their workforce about well-being and give them support, give them some technology to help them to apply it and make it a practice. Because, if you don't clean your teeth every day, you're going to get some tooth decay. And it's a very similar thing with well-being. If you don't look after yourself, at some point, things are going to unravel in terms of your physical and mental health. So, we're very, very excited, really, to start working on developing our programme. And we had a marvellous meeting with some of Jeanette's team today, because Flexicare are going to be our first clients in putting this programme in and promoting well-being within organisations.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the 5 ways to well-being are out there and well documented, but now is the time for action to really turn what is policy and it's not being implemented into real and proper programmes that are going to make a difference. Because if we don't intervene now, then the situation that we're seeing within the NHS is likely only to get worse. And so we're talking about some of the optimism around the solution that you sort of have in the pipeline. So just before we finish up, I'd like to talk about kind of where you're hoping to be with that. If we look at the next 12 months as a time frame, for instance, what's next for the solution, and what is it going to involve, do we think?
Well, we have 2 approaches. We call as an app and as an app, Scott. Our first app is a mnemonic, which says you need to have your analysis, which we've now got with the UK benchmark. You need to then work out your priorities, which the analysis gives you, which is what I spent my life doing in internal communication, finding out where the problem was. And then your final P is you need to move, as Sally says, from posters to a program. So that, and then from there, and I have to let you, Chris, talk about it. He's invested not just the last 10 years, but the last year working specifically on an app for employers and a wonderful dashboard for employees. So we have the app which leads you to the program, and we have the app which we've developed that gives you that ongoing daily ability to measure what you're doing. And from there, our next stage is partners. And so we're currently talking now to CQ, or we will be talking to CQC. We're talking about to Apple Healthcare. We're talking to HSJ. We're talking to people like Dr. Shabri Huzur around One Gloucester. We're talking to academia. Jeanette is relentless and tireless on finding partners who understand we need to be talking well-being plus care.
Academia as well.
And yeah.
Academia and Apple. I think, Scott, it's about personal relationships. We can execute our vision at the speed we can get buy-in from these people who want to come on the journey of change. So that's the key things. I think everybody does, but we've got to connect thinking to doing, which is what the CQC picked up in our outstanding report. We were particularly impressed with that. So this is all the thinking, and we are now, great meeting this morning, connecting it to doing. We're making it a physical reality and building in health and well-being through, for the next generation. So we're carrying on, and we're making quite some waves now.
I think the great thing that working with Jeanette, Scott, is it's fabulous that she has overall outstandings from the CQC on her hubs and hublets system. And what we've been doing is coming at it from a technology point of view. And so now we talk about a triple H of hybrid hubs and hublets, putting together well-being and care, but not just in the care sector, financial well-being, personal well-being, organizational well-being. So people are talking about it, but not quite understanding what it is and how to do it. So part and parcel of what we've been trying to do is actually define it. So our iceberg of that triumvirate of well-being, we think is a world first. The app that we're developing which is called Moments, allows you to not just see your connecting, which you'll use your social networking, or you'll be actives, you'll use your Fitbits, your Take Notice, you'll use your Calms, your Keep Learnings, you'll use your Udemys. You can put all of those; they're all separate. Wellbeing actually is all 5 of those. So we're hoping that we can pull all that together with a single simple concept that says well-being sits at the heart of your relationships and your health as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's fantastic to obviously hear that there's some significant traction going on here, and more people are coming on board with the journey, because it can't come a moment too soon a solution as important as this. And hopefully, over the next 12 months or so, we see some more positive news on this side of things. And it would be great actually to maybe review where we are at some point in the next few months, just to see how it is all coming along, and hopefully people do cotton onto the iceberg and how everything sort of fits together.
Yeah, well, we hope that the plan is to keep things alive with programs. You can go out with a customer service program. It is an employer app. It's not an app that you can get from the App Store. It will be on the App Store, but it's an employer and employee app. And so to keep things alive, we will be running our YouGov surveys. We'll run 5 a year, so every 2 months, and you better come back and say, now we can talk about how you being active and what you're doing, and that ties in with the whole obesity issues, and it ties in with diabetes issues, and then you can start talking about Take Notice and understanding where calm and mindfulness sits in. So we hope to be able to keep everything alive with all the excitement and the news. That allows well-being to be put at the heart of organisational policy as well as their practices.
And certainly, let's hope that we do see that. Before, obviously, we do wrap up. Does anybody else have anything to add?
No, I think we've exhausted all avenues. But I
think it'd be great to hear from Chris because he's been working so hard on Moments, the app. So, Chris, over to you. I'm going to drop him in it here.
Mm-hmm.
As per usual, Kevin. Thank you. We have been developing it for a year, and I guess when we started the process, we looked at these 5 ways, thinking they've been well established for a long time, but why is no one really grasping them and running them? And I think the world has moved on since 2008, when the Cameron government first kind of commissioned a piece of work, and we do all have phones, and we do all are used to using apps. So I think the app gives us a common, familiar framework, but rather than an app telling you what to do, this is much more about you defining your own version of what the 5 ways mean to you. So I think lots of apps out there tell people what they should be doing for their well-being. The belief really in the system is that deep down we all know things that we can do and have done in the past that are good for us. And the app is a way of capturing that and really discovering who you are from a wellbeing perspective. And then once you've kind of identified what that looks like in your world, you will have a kind of framework and model for you, but also something you can share with those around you. So, yeah, it's taken a while to get to where we are with it. We're beta testing now, and the initial results are very good. Yeah, and so now we just need to see where we roll it out with Flexicare and where we go from there.
Absolutely.
And what we're hoping to do from there as well, Scott, is that this, as I say, it is an employer app. The employer gets a dashboard that allows the employee to actually connect with them, either saying who they are or anonymously. And then not only does the employee get how well they're doing and get the 5 ways, but the employer gets to get to know with their dashboard how well they're doing with the 5 ways. So in terms of changing what you say and what you do and what you look like, that will affect the company culture. So by changing the climate of what people say and what they do and how they do it from the bottom up, and letting people define their own what that well-being means to them and how they're going about it, that's the process of moving from, as we say, from care to well-being and from cure to prevention.
Exactly. It's all about tailoring it to the individual, isn't it? Because no one approach is going to be a one-size-fits-all one, is it? So very important, and that's what this solution considers, which is absolutely fantastic. And let's hope that we do see the positive traction that it deserves over the course of the next few months and indeed beyond. And just a reminder to listeners as well, if anything that we've talked about on today's programme does particularly resonate with you and you have a question or a comment to make on any of this, you can contact us and submit questions or comments, and that would be via leaderscouncil.co.uk/contact-us. Any questions, of course, directed to our guests will, of course, forward directly onto them. And also, if you have your own perspective to bring directly to the discussion table on this or any other topical matter or issue, then you too can apply to be on our programme via leaderscouncil.co.uk/apply as well. For now, it has been an immense pleasure welcoming Kevin, Chris, Jeanette and Sally onto today's show. Thank you all for taking the time to join us on the programme. And by all means, do take care, and I'm sure we'll catch up on the show very soon in future.
Happy Christmas, Scott.
Happy Christmas.
Happy
Happy Christmas. And to everybody.
Absolutely. To all of our listeners tuning in, I do hope that you all enjoy a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. If I don't, of course, get to address you before
very
then.
happy. I'm healthy. I'm well-being.
Cheers, Scott.
Absolutely. And as always, on today's programme, I've been your host, Scott Challoner, on the Leaders Council podcast. And until next time, when we'll be back with a whole new perspective on leadership and current affairs, please do take care all, and goodbye.